My name is Jonathan Barnett. I was born in 1955, in January 21st of 1955. I was actually born at the Siloam Springs Hospital, which it's not there anymore. It's been torn down. And I spent the first 8 years of my life in Gentry, actually. My dad, we lived there close to the public school system. My dad was a Baptist minister, and he taught at the Gentry High School and also ended up being principal at the Concord High School.
So tell me more about your parents. Who were they and what were they like?
My dad's name was Ray Barnett. My mother's name was Laureen Hardcastle, was her maiden name, and they lived out on a farm. My mother's dad was his name was Achel, and they had he had close to 1,000 acres out close to where the Swepco power plant is now. In fact, I think 160 acres of his original farm is now part of the Swepco power plant. But he was a farmer, but his specialty was he was in the orchard business. Apples and peaches and pears, and that was the strong points. He also did strawberries. He did other produce type stuff, but the apples and the peaches were the main thing. And he had probably the largest orchard in Northwest Arkansas, and raised a lot of produce. He also had cattle and had a lot of beef cattle as well. So came from a farm background. My dad's family were also farmers, but to a much smaller scale, and they were raised now underneath where the Swepco Lake is at, which is there. I think the house is like 90 feet below, in the main creek that provided the water for the lake for Swepco came out of a spring out of their backyard. And I played there many times as a kid, way before the power plant came in. And so my grandparents were both with like a mile apart, and my dad's family, George Barnett and Ida Barnett, he not only was a farmer, but he worked for the railroad. He loaded railroad ties into boxcars and unloaded railroad ties. So he was a very hard-working man and a lot of physical labor. So the family that I came from my parents and my grandparents, all very hard-working, very manual labor. So we grew up learning how to work and knowing how to work. So it was a real benefit to our family, of course.
Well, tell me about your siblings. You were from a big family.
I was. I'm number 6 out of 7, and I had 2 brothers that served in the military, Vietnam, and supported the Vietnam War. One was a pilot, Robert, and if you look around here in the office back in there, you'll see some of his memorabilia, but he flew over the Ho Chi Minh Trail a lot. My brother David was kind of more of a support side in the Philippines and in Taiwan and other locations that were supporting the Vietnam War. My dad was a World War II veteran, served at Okinawa, went over on a ship, came back on a ship, and so I had an uncle that my mother's older brother that was killed in the Battle of St. Lo. So had an uncle that served and didn't make it through the war. Had most all of my uncles on my dad's side and my mother's side all served in the World War II area. So a lot of history with the military and veterans. So I have a lot of respect for veterans and for those that have served.
Good, thank you. So where did you go to school and what was it like there?
I went to school in Gentry for the first, second, and third grade, and then my dad was minister at the Gum Springs Baptist Church right outside of Siloam Springs, and there was a young man there in Gentry that had quite a criminal record, and I think the Benton County judge, the circuit judge, finally kicked him out of the county. He said that his family could no longer live in Benton County because I think he'd been before the judge like 50 times, and so, but he had threatened one of my sisters in Gentry. My parents were afraid that he would do harm, so they moved us to a farm outside of Siloam Springs. And so I started the fourth grade at the Siloam Springs public school system, and the young man ended up going to Watts, Oklahoma, and committed murder. He recently died in prison. He had started the McAllister prison riots, and so my parents judged the situation correctly. It was a good move at a good time.
Interesting. So tell me more about your family business. What was it, and what was your part?
Well, of course, my dad, like I say, was a minister and an educator, and but since he had been raised on a farm, we always, when we lived outside of Siloam Springs, we had a couple beef cattle. We had 2 cows, a Guernsey and a Jersey, and I obviously would milk them in the morning and the evening, and so it helped support the family by having milk and cottage cheese and butter, and so been down that path a lot, all by hand. Yes, no mechanical devices, all by hand. And so I was, once we moved from Gentry to the farm in Siloam Springs, I was basically raised on a farm, and but the Illinois River was close by, so I would fish a lot. We ate a lot of fish. I caught a lot of fish. I was really good at fishing as a young man. We picked up walnuts, sold walnuts. We picked poke in the spring and sold it to Allen Cannon Company. My dad always had a unbelievable garden, so we knew how to garden. We cut our own wood and had a wood fireplace. We had chainsaws and axes, but the chainsaws were somewhat primitive, based on what we see today. But still, we had chainsaws, and but a lot of splitting wood with axes and wedges, and we had chickens, but they were chickens not in a chicken house, just kind of roamed around. And so we had eggs, and we had chickens to eat. So, basically back, and that would have been in the 60s. And so as you well know, that was back in a time where farming was still important to our economy in Northwest Arkansas, and a lot of people still depended upon the farm for their food. And Benton County obviously was very rural at that time in the 50s and 60s, and farming was still very, very big, and farming is still big to this day. But cattle farming and row crops, you had Allen Cannon Company, and so there were a cannery, so there were just a lot of agriculture in Benton County in those days, and again, still a fairly significant amount today.
Well, how does that, growing up on a farm and getting up early and milking cows, that's hard work. I mean, and then doing it again probably at night sometimes. How does that set your work ethic later in life?
Well, of course, in those days, it was cold in the morning in the winter, so until you stoked the fire and got the fire going, you kind of moved around pretty quick. And in the summer, you didn't have air conditioner, at least we didn't, and so we had, open the windows up and had fans. But when you're from a large family, which I was, and you don't have much, but when you don't have much, but you know how to work, you don't look at your situation. A lot of people are in the same situation, you grew up knowing how to be self-sufficient and how to work. And it's like I always tell people, my dad never ever depended on government for anything. He always made his own way. And even though life was difficult when you had a large family, you got after it. And so my parents knew how to work and came from a working environment when they were raised, and it was passed on to the 7 of us children, and we all knew how to work.
So what different jobs did you have over the years that eventually led you to where you are today?
Well, of course, as a young man, I told you I milked 2 cows every day, once in the morning, once in the evening, and fished and picked up walnuts and picked poke and worked in the garden, cut wood, fed the chickens. And then when I was older enough to push a lawnmower, I became a lawn boy. And so I started out, mowing yards, and my mother would take me into Siloam, and I would mow people's yards with the push lawnmower. And it was a source of, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to, buy some hamburgers and some shakes and help my parents at least, buy some shoes to go to school and some pants. And so, every little bit helped.
So how did you end up getting involved in politics?
It's, I tell people that I may be a bit unusual, and that is, even as a teenager, I had a built-in passion. I was just born with it, and I cared about the political environment, and it always interested me. And even at a young age, I was knocking on doors in 1965, 66. As a young person, I was knocking on doors for Win Rockefeller when he was running for governor, and I was knocking on doors for John Paul Hammersmith when he was running for Congress. And there was a gentleman in Siloam Springs by the name of Preston Bynum, and Preston and his dad were in the car business, and I got to, Preston always took an interest in young people, and I was probably one of those young people that he took interest in. And I would go with Preston to political meetings when I was 13, 14, 15 years of age, and I would ride in the back seat of his big Chrysler, and wherever Preston went, I went too. And so I had some role models with Preston, and a gentleman by the name of Jim Sheets in Siloam Springs that had a men's clothing store that was involved politically, and that's kind of where I got started. I started going to Benton County Republican committees probably in 68, 69, 70, and then when I was old enough to join the committee at 18 years of age, I joined immediately. And that would have been 1973 that I would have joined the Benton County Republican Committee. And that was really the early stages. People don't realize the history of the Republican Party in Benton County, but it basically started in Siloam Springs. And there was some older gentlemen in the community, and I couldn't tell you some of their names, but they would meet at a dairy bar once a month, and Preston Bynum was involved in that. And they eventually recruited a Siloam Springs guy to run for county sheriff. His name was James Pearson. He was the first Republican elected in Benton County since Reconstruction. And we got him elected county sheriff. So he was the only Republican that we had in Benton County at the time. And then the first Republican to get elected to statewide office, which was a state house seat, was a guy named Jim Sheets. And Jim was involved in Kiwanis. He was involved in the Siloam Springs Chamber. He had a men's clothing store at Highland Park, and that was his primary livelihood, is men's clothing. but he was the first Republican elected to the state house in Arkansas, and that would have been probably in '68. But anyhow, and Jim served for like one term, and back in those days the roads weren't good, and so it'd take you 5.5 hours to drive to Little Rock, and it was basically a citizens legislature at that time. It really was a personal sacrifice to serve, especially when you live as far away from the capital, from Siloam Springs. It was a long drive, and we didn't have the infrastructure, the roads that we have today. And so, but Jim did it for 2 years, and he realized that he just couldn't afford to do it anymore and make a livelihood for his family. So he stepped aside, and then Preston Bynum ran. And Preston had been on the city council. He was elected to Siloam Springs City Council at age 21, and then served and then ran for the state house. And so he was really the second Republican to get elected. And Preston was, in the house there were 99 Democrats and 1 Republican, and used to joke a lot that you could stick all the Republicans at the Capitol in a phone booth, and it was very true, because Jim Sheets and Preston Bynums were the first 2 that got elected as Republicans, and came out of Siloam Springs, Arkansas. And so that and then when I was probably 15, I was very active in going to Benton County Republican Committee meetings. And back in those days, it was very small group. I mean, we had Beth and Cass Huff, who were kind of involved in, to tell you who Beth and Cass Huff were. They had come from Michigan, and Cass is the one that really started Daisy Heading, or Daisy BB there in Rogers. And of course, that was the first major manufacturing company in Benton County. Northwest Arkansas was the Daisy company, and they made BB guns. And back in those days, Daisy was a big deal, and a lot of kids had Daisy guns. And but Beth and Cass were very helpful to help us get a Republican Party started in Benton County. And then of course you had Preston Bynum, and the Cuffs had the Beth and Cass Huff had a guy named Jack Powers who worked at the Daisy plant, and he was kind of one of their representatives to help organize the county committee. And so it started as a real small group, and I was there. I was part of it. And even as a young person, not knowing a lot, I was very interested, and I was very much there to help build the party. And obviously we started picking off one position at a time. And of course today we're the majority party. In fact, there aren't any Democrats elected at the county level or in Benton County. They're all Republicans, but it's because of people like myself and others who have worked hard to build the conservative movement in Benton County. When I was 16 years of age, because of my political involvement, became chair of the Teenage Republicans of the state of Arkansas. So I served on the state Republican Executive Committee at 16 years of age, and have pretty well served on that committee since that time. And so that had been about 1970. And then when I was in college, I was chair of the College Republicans. And when I was 19 years of age, I had already been not only going to Benton County Republican Committee meetings, but I was going to city council meetings in Siloam. So at 19 years of age, and as a student at John Brown University, I was elected to the Siloam Springs City Council, which I won up to my good friend Preston Bynum. He was elected at 21 and went on to serve in the House, and I was elected at 19 years of age and served 4 years on the Siloam Springs City Council. One interesting fact about Preston Bynum, Preston went on to become chief of staff for Frank White when Frank was governor. And so that would have been in 1980. Preston left the House at that point in time to become chief of staff for Frank White. So, you know, a lot of interesting stuff politically came out of Benton County.
Well, one of the things we've talked about in several of the interviews that's come up is the so-called change from blue to red, which is what we're talking about now. But talk about that at the state level and maybe some involvement you had there.
You know, because Arkansas had the McClellans, had the Bumpers, had the Pryors, and then the Clintons. Those were all strong personalities, and you know, if you weren't from Northwest Arkansas, Arkansas was just a blue state. It was just the old Democrat regime since Reconstruction, and a lot of those Democrats, if you looked at them today, would be as conservative, if not more so, than a lot of Republicans are today. But they were kind of born and raised as Democrats, and that's what they were. And so it took some time. I think the big change in Arkansas was when Obama was elected president. I think a lot of Arkansans realized that they just weren't that far to the left. They were more conservative, and that's when the switch really started at the state level. Now, it already changed in Northwest Arkansas and Benton County. In fact, if you wanted to run for public office at the state level, it didn't matter if you were a Mike Huckabee and you were from Hope, Arkansas, or Texarkana. If you wanted to run as Republican statewide, you had to win Benton County. Benton County, most of the Republican vote came out of Benton County. So you couldn't get elected at state level unless you came to Benton County and campaigned hard here and won in Benton County. That was the prerequisite. And you know, today it's not that way anymore, but still a lot of the vote comes out of Northwest Arkansas and Benton County. So
how do you take a candidate who's a preacher from South Arkansas and make him a statewide candidate? Let's talk about that big race between Huckabee and Nate Coulter and how that...
Well, I actually met Mike Huckabee in 1972, and I met Mike at the Arkansas American Legion Boy State program, and I was actually an alternate delegate from Siloam Springs. The American Legion were sending, at that time, 5 young men from Siloam Springs to the Boy State program, and I actually wasn't one of the 5 that was picked, but I was an alternate, so one canceled and I got to go. But it was at Camp Robinson there in North Little Rock, and of course, you know, it was at a military camp, and so the Boy State program at that time was kind of military rules, and but the purpose of the program was to go and to learn about civics, to learn about how to run for public office, both back that time it was the Federalist and the Nationalist Party. And you would hear political speakers that would come in, the governor, a congressman, senator, state reps, state senators, and so it was an educational experience. And so when I was there, I, being from Siloam Springs, met a young man from Hope, and his name was Mike Huckabee. And Mike, I realized at that time, had some gifts and talents that a lot of us young men weren't totally blessed with. There were some God-given talents that Mike had, and so Mike ran for governor of Boy State. Dale Bumpers was governor at the time. Mike ran for governor, and out of 1,200 votes, Mike probably got like 1,050 votes. So I ran for the Boys Nation, which was the U.S. Senate, and out of 1,200 votes, I won by 2 votes, and but I won. And but I told Mike Huckabee at 16 years of age. I said, Mike, I was already involved in politics. I was already chair of the Teenage Republicans for the state and on the state Republican Executive Committee, and was going to my first Republican National Convention in Miami Beach, 1972, for Richard Nixon. And so I was already involved, and my conversation with Mike Huckabee at the end of Boy State was, Mike, I'm going to run you for public office one of these days. You're a very, you've got a lot of talent. We need your talent. The party needs your talent. You're conservative, and I'm going to run you for public office one of these days. And even though that was 1972, but 20 years later, in 1992, I actually chaired Mike's. I talked him into running for, tried to get him to run for Congress in the 4th District, but he wanted to run for the United States Senate, and I couldn't change his mind. So at that time, we recruited Jay Dickey, and of course, Jay did win the 4th Congressional District, beat Burl Anthony, who was a longtime Democrat there. And but Mike wanted to run against then Bumpers, who had been governor, and then was a 3-time U.S. senator and very well thought of, and had over $2 million in the campaign fund. But that's the race Mike wanted to run, and so I chaired that race. And of course, Mike didn't win. He got like 38% of the vote. He won Benton County. And but as you well know, that same year in 1992, not only did Mike lose the U.S. Senate race, but Bill Clinton won the presidency. And so consequently, Bill Clinton left the governorship to become president, which left a vacancy, and so our lieutenant governor became governor, which was Jim Guy Tucker. And then so I told Mike, I said, Mike, you just got through running the statewide race, the lieutenant governor position is open, you need to run. And he did, and surprisingly we won. Mike won lieutenant governor, and at all odds. Nobody predicted it, but Mike was a hard campaigner, had been all around the state, and his message resonated with the citizens of the state of Arkansas, and he won. And then as the course of history has shown us with Whitewater, when Whitewater took place with with the Clintons, because of that Kenneth Starr investigation and all the happenings that went along with that, then Jim Guy Tucker was indicted over the Whitewater scandal, and ended up having to resign, and Mike was lieutenant governor. He became governor. So then the rest is history. You can talk about that for a long time, but anyhow, Mike wasn't the first Republican governor in our state of Arkansas. You had Win Rockefeller from 66 to 70, and then 1980 you had Frank White for one term, and then Bill Clinton came back and beat him. So so I've been very involved in Arkansas politics from all the way back to from the 60s all the way through the Huckabee administration. And of course, today we have a daughter of Mike Huckabee, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that is governor of the state today, and she probably wouldn't appreciate it, but I kind of helped raise Sarah a little bit and had some involvement early on in her life. I think she was in the 8th grade when we were running her dad in 1992 for the United States Senate, so I was in Texarkana a lot, and we were around the state campaigning, and so funny things happen on the way to the market. Kids grow up and they're influenced by their parents and politics, and the next generation kicks in, and there you go.
So how did you go from city council member to highway commissioner for your political career?
Well, when Preston Bynum became chief of staff for Frank White, he gave up a House seat, and I actually ran when I was 26 years of age, I actually ran for Preston's House seat in a Republican primary. And back then, I was a young man and I didn't have any money, and there was a gentleman from Tawnytown that ran, Jerry Henshaw, and Jerry was, I think he was 65 at the time, and he was the head of the Arkansas Cattlemen's Association, and I think he was the president of Eggland there in Tawnytown. So Jerry wanted to run, and we had a primary, and I think I lost by 50 votes in the Republican primary. But the good thing about it, sometimes in life when you're young, you learn a lot. And I was newly married and had our first child, and at some point in time, you go to work, you make your own way in life, and you provide for your family. And so it taught me a lot. And at that time, once I ran for that position and got beat, I learned a lot of patience, but I knew it was time to go to work in the private sector and make my own way in life, and that's what I did. And it was a good decision. It was probably good that I got beat because I got started a little earlier. Politics is tough early in life, especially when you haven't made your livelihood and made your own way in life and raised your family. So I went to work, and again, 20 some odd years later, I ended up doing what I said I would do, and that was help Mike Huckabee get elected to public office, and I of course chaired that campaign, and that's. But through those same years, I was very involved politically on the Benton County Republican Committee. I held every position that you could hold, including the chair of the county committee, and built the Republican Party in Benton County. And it was strong, it was healthy, and eventually we one by one took over every seat at the courthouse, and then we took over every seat in the state house and the state senate. And back then, even the judges were party judges, so all the judges were Democrats. We took those seats over one at a time, and David Klinger, I think, was the last one. Finally, I think I handled David Klinger's press conference to convince him to switch parties from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party. Of course, David Klinger had beaten Asa Hutchison when Asa first ran for office, as he ran for Benton County prosecutor and did not win. And,
who were some of the key races, other ones besides what we talked about, like maybe Mary Lou Slinkard or the Hutchisons, or who were some of the big ones in Benton County?
Well, Mary Lou Slinkard was one of the early, county clerks that we got elected, and that was a big race for us. But you had Jim Caldwell, who was a Church of Christ minister in Rogers, and he ran for a state senate seat, and we won that race. I think the guy he beat, he was an attorney. His last name was Little, I believe. But that was a big win for us to win that state senate seat first time. Of course, Preston was already a state representative. I'm trying to think of some of the early people. The Hutchisons, which were related to the Hendren family, of course. Jim's Hendren's father, Kim, they were all Democrats, and Kim was a Democrat state senator. And when some of his wife's family, the Hutchison family, started to run for public office, and of course, Asa and Tim, I was already on the county committee. I'd been on the county committee 2 or 3 years before Asa and Tim came along. So I was there when they joined the county committee, and I was there. I helped recruit Fay Bozeman to run for office. Fay was one of the early Republicans that we got elected to the state Senate. So I was there during all that. I'm trying to think of the state senator's name that was head of the Poultry Federation, that we elected. We elected him first of all as the county treasurer, I believe, Benton County treasurer, and then he went on and he eventually became a state senator, and then Kim Hendon ran against him, and I think Kim eventually won that seat back, but won it back as a Republican. He'd switched parties at that point in time, but anyhow, so we've got really a rich history of a lot of people getting involved in our party in Benton County, and I think being a rural county, back in the early days, Siloam Springs was 2,300 people, Bentonville was 2,300 people. It was a long drive from Fayetteville to Bentonville, a lot of farmland between. Certainly not like it is today, and so it. And I think with Sam Walton, I tell Sam Walton's family that Sam, being a businessman, and I would tell you that he was a conservative Republican. That may be hard for some of his grandchildren to accept today, but he was. And Sam's influence on Benton County and Northwest Arkansas was enormous, was immense, and obviously it changed the scope of Northwest Arkansas and Benton County, and so many doors have been opened up because of Sam Walton. We wouldn't be where we're at today if Sam Walton and J.B. Hunt and John Tyson, they just opened the doors for a lot of people to stay and work in Benton County and grow Benton County, and because of hard work and business-minded people, and most people in Northwest Arkansas were conservative, and so that's helped us to grow. But it's also because of hard work and conservative values. It's promoted people who work hard for a living and have to pay for the utility bill and feed their families and make mortgage payments. A lot of those people understand the value of hard work, and most of them are conservative in nature. And so, but those people had a big influence on all of our way of life in Northwest Arkansas, and a lot of us wouldn't be where we're at today if those people hadn't have come along and opened up lots of doors and lots of opportunities, and their families are still doing a lot of that today. So we're very appreciative and very grateful for those people, Sam Walton and the Tysons and the Hunts, that really helped a lot of people in Northwest Arkansas, and we're strong economically today because of some of those individuals.
Talk about when you were highway commissioner, what were the issues, what were your challenges? And
well, of course, the challenges were that I took Bobby Hopper's place, and the challenges were that politically, we were still very much a Democrat state, and the third district had become Republican, but the first, second, and fourth district were Democrat, and all the state constitutional officers were Democrats, up until really the point that Mike Huckabee really, it changed some during Mike's tenure, but the legislature, who controls a lot of the funding for highways, it was just hard for them to invest the amount of money in Northwest Arkansas because we were growing. And so in the traffic counts we were having increased traffic counts, and yet as we were growing, some of the rest of the part of the state was really not growing so much. And but when you've got, highway dollars, and you want to invest those dollars where the traffic counts are and where the population is growing, the jobs are being produced. But if you were from southern Arkansas and you weren't growing, in fact, in some cases having population decreases, you wanted that money to continue to flow into those areas because that was part of their economic development. And if you were ever going to grow, you had to keep money flowing to that part of the state. So there was a lot of competition, I think, at the time with the money of where you invest in highways and infrastructure in the state. And it's probably to a certain extent a challenge to this day. But you don't want to stop growth in South Arkansas or East Arkansas. You want them to have opportunity as well. So you do care about the dollars that they receive, and you got to care about everybody in the state of Arkansas. But when you have increased traffic counts and increased growth and population growth like we've had in Northwest Arkansas, you have to invest. And obviously I served 10 years on the Highway Commission from 1999 to 2009. And as a highway commissioner, it's a volunteer position. People don't realize that, but it's not a paid position. And but the Mac Blackwell, the legislation that set up the Highway Commission as we know it today. So I would go to Little Rock during the session, and I would lobby for highway dollars as a highway commissioner. And it was difficult because everybody's for highways and everybody wants to support you, but by the way, I'll support a highway bill, but you're going to have to do this highway project here in this county and this project, or if you want my vote, you've got to promise me those projects. And of course, you can't do that because you don't have enough money to pay everybody's highway projects. There's just for every 10 projects you want to do, you might have enough money for one if you're lucky. And so I was not real successful lobbying for those tiers at the legislature, so it was difficult. But because I built relationships during those 10 years with members of the legislature, I ran for the when my term ended as highway commissioner. I had immediately ran for the legislature and won from Siloam Springs, Northwest Arkansas, Benton County, and was pretty quickly appointed as chair of transportation in the House. And so it was my highway bill with the half-cent sales tax that's really has transformed transportation in Arkansas. It was my bill, and a lot of politicians in the state of Arkansas gave me a hard time because it was, I'm conservative Republican, yet it was a half-cent sales tax, and I think I had 17 Republicans in the House voted for it, and all the Democrats voted for it. And in the Senate, it was similar. And I think Beebe, who was governor at the time, wasn't necessarily for it. But I convinced I'd convinced certain members of the legislature that, look, let me take this to the vote of the people. I know that you all don't want to go on the record as a member of the House or the Senate is voting for a tax, but let me at least get it on the ballot, put me on it, let me have a referred act. And so they did. And Madison Murphy, who was at that time was chair of the Highway Commission, who I'd served with earlier, put $1 million of his own money into educating the citizens of Arkansas. And we got the half-cent sales tax passed, and that created, a lot of new money, over $250 million a year of new money to go into highways in Arkansas. Infrastructure was badly needed in the state. We were losing a lot of good contractors. Infrastructure wasn't that good, and the interstate system needed to be rehabilitated. Northwest Arkansas was growing. The rest of the state needed continuing flow of dollars to take care of infrastructure. And the gas tax, the fuel tax, for every penny increase in fuel tax, it only raised about $12 million a year. And people were tired of high fuel taxes, and there was no appetite for increase in gasoline tax. So the half-cent sales tax really transformed transportation in Arkansas even to this very day. We wouldn't have near the infrastructure in Northwest Arkansas, or even throughout the whole state today. We wouldn't have 6 lanes of I-49. We wouldn't have the Bella Vista bypass. We wouldn't have the Springdale bypass. We wouldn't have the Walton Boulevard. We wouldn't have the 72 improvements out to XNA. There's just so many projects in Northwest Arkansas that would have never taken place without the half-cent sales tax. And it's, as a citizen of Siloam Springs in Northwest Arkansas, I know that it saved Northwest Arkansas. It was taking an hour and a half to drive from Fayetteville to Bentonville to go to work at Walmart at the headquarters. And it was, you had 2-lane roads and 4-lane roads, and you did not have good infrastructure. And it put Arkansas and Northwest Arkansas on the map, and we're still there today doing very well. And I'm very proud and very pleased to have been part of that.
Well, let's talk about the Northwest Arkansas Airport, a regional airport. How did it get started, and how did it get to where it is today, and what was kind of your role in that?
Well, I go back to, I was a young person, when that was being put together, and Sam Walton, obviously, he and John Paul Hammersmith and John Tyson and J.B. Hunt, those were and then of course, Alice Walton. Alice really kind of took the ball and ran with it for her dad, Sam. But these people had a vision that we needed an airport and a good aviation airport in Northwest Arkansas. And at the time, really the main aviation airport, even though you have the small airports in Siloam Springs and in Bentonville and Rogers and Springdale, but the main aviation airport was Fayetteville, Drake Field. And you had one airline at the time, which was American Airlines, but Drake, as we well know, was hard to get in and out of and not always safe. But you had people like Uvalde Lindsay, and I give Uvalde and Carol Lindsay a tremendous amount of credit, because Uvalde, he really helped start the Northwest Arkansas Council, and Uvalde really worked hard to start the process in all the public hearings to get XNA, Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport, built. And sometimes people forget about the amount of work that Uvalde and his wife Carol did, and I remember it very well. But as you well know, there was opposition. There was a lot of federal opposition. U.S. Senator John McCain, had the General Accounting Office come into Northwest Arkansas. They did hearings, and they decided that, we didn't need an airport, and it didn't need federal dollars. And at the time, I think John Stossel with ABC 2020 stood in front of the population sign at Highfill, and the population said Highfill population 48. And they did ABC did a 2020 deal with John Stossel that, there was no need for this airport. The population wasn't here. But, they were wrong. They were wrong. And sometimes in life, not everybody's right. And they didn't anticipate the growth that we were going to have. And today, not only because of the vision of some of these people, we have not only a very strong and economy, but Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport, National Airport, XNA, is thriving, and we're a big part of the success story of Northwest Arkansas. And we've got, not only American Airlines that has multiple flights in and out every day, but you've got Delta Airlines, you've got United Airlines, you've got Frontier Airlines, you've got Allegiant, you've got Breeze Airlines, and you know, probably within a year or two we'll have over 1 million enplanements coming in and out of Northwest Arkansas. And so it has been a real success story, and the traveling community, the people that travel, whether it's for business, you know, used to the biggest part of the traveling community at X&A was the business community. And today it's really a lot of it's leisure travel. People are traveling in and out. We at one point had 27 nonstops. I think we've got 22, 23 nonstops now. But it's a growing airport, and it's really servicing the needs of travelers in Northwest Arkansas. It's changed the direction of travel here for us, and I'm confident that it will be very important to economic growth in Northwest Arkansas for many years to come.
Good, thank you. Before I get on to some of the final questions, are there other things maybe that I haven't thought to ask you about, or maybe some things we could go into more detail that you
Well,
want
if
to
you
talk
give me
about?
that list, I could probably come up with several things, but
You want to see the... We've covered most everything
Yeah.
on there. I just wondered if there's other things maybe that we hadn't thought about or talked about that you want to...
Well, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about John Brown University.
Good.
And I'm going to keep this just
Okay,
for a
no
second. But John Brown University has really been one of the mainstay universities in Northwest Arkansas since 1919. Private, non-denominational, Christian college. A lot of us have been privileged to go there and graduate from there, and you know, it's given a lot of us, even though we were all raised right with good parents, again, it was a continuation of a good Christian education that helped us all realize, you know, give us a moral compass, and it gave us good, strong Christian values, conservative values. And so I think John Brown University has been a very important educational institution in Northwest Arkansas, helped educate a lot of young people. So I'm very grateful for the college that I attended there.
Good, thank you.
John Brown III, who was at one point the president of the college, I actually convinced him to run for a state senate race in the 90s, and chaired his race, and he served in the state senate for a few years, and then went on with the Wingate Foundation and made a lot of difference in the lives of people in Northwest Arkansas, and the philanthropic families of the Hutchison family, which is the shoe family from, you know, that did the shoes at Walmart. And so the Wingate Foundation has been very important to Northwest Arkansas. I actually went into the construction business once I graduated John Brown University, and until the economy went south in 1979 and 80, and interest rates, as you all know, went to about 21%, and there weren't a lot of jobs around here. So I went offshore and worked in, I was in ballast engineer for a semi-submersible drilling rig in Green Canyon Block 154 in the Gulf of Mexico. I worked for Zapata and helped operate a big offshore drilling rig for 2 years when the economy was bad here. So I did have to leave for a couple of years, but I commuted back and forth, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I thought that was interesting early on. I want to talk a little bit about, a lot of people don't talk about this very much anymore, but the one thing that really helped Northwest Arkansas also was the development of Beaver Lake. and Bob Crafton and Jim Toll, the Crafton Toll engineering firm there in Rogers. They were old highway guys. Bob Crafton originally started out working for the highway department as a highway engineer, and then left and started his own business. But those guys were early people that had the vision for Beaver Lake and working with the Corps of Engineers, and the White River. It was a water source, but the Beaver Lake Dam and the development of that lake and having a water source there and even recreation really has been a big important factor also in the development of Benton County. A lot of people have forgot about that and they don't realize it, but it was a big part of the development of Northwest Arkansas. So I wanted to mention something about Beaver Lake and Bob Crafton, Jim Toll. These guys were early guys that had vision that a lot of people didn't have, and I'm very grateful for people like that.
Do you remember Richard Starr and Hardy Croxton or some of the ones involved with Beaver Water District?
I do, and those guys also were very important. But I wanted to mention that. I've been in Benton County all of my life, and when I graduated high school in Siloam Springs in 1973, and I go back to looking at Bentonville and Siloam Springs, and we were similar in size, and from about that point on, Bentonville really, because of the Sam Walton and the development of Walmart, it just took off. And today, even though Siloam Springs is still very much a part of Benton County, and we've had good growth, but Bentonville and Rogers has really grown and really transformed, and it's it'll never be the same. I mean, it's a lot of good jobs in Northwest Arkansas, a lot of good paying jobs. People, one of the fastest growing places in the nation, right here in Northwest Arkansas. Good paying jobs. A lot of people have made a lot of money and create a lot of wealth, which is a good thing, because when you create wealth, you create jobs, and people can prosper and pass it on. But so Northwest Arkansas has become, a lot of our communities have become fairly wealthy communities, and which is a good thing. So I wanted to mention that.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. If someone came, let's say you were in D.C. or somewhere not in Arkansas, and someone says, I hear you're from Benton County. What's Benton County like? What would you tell them?
Well, Benton County is just an old rural county. It goes back to a lot of history, going back to the Civil War. You got the Pea Ridge National Military Park. You've got a lot of people that fought on behalf of the Confederacy. You had a lot of people that really were Union people, so it was kind of caught in between there. But again, it's just a real rural community, and slow growth, hard-working people. You had the railroad came through, Kansas City Southern, the Arkansas A&M that came out of Missouri. But a lot of, really hard-working people, farmers, that just kind of hard life, hard living, but good foundation, good values, good people. Our ancestors here in Benton County are good, God-fearing Christian people that knew the value of hard work, and I think Sam Walton, when he came over from Newport, saw that value of our people here. And I go back to Beth and Cass Huff with the first manufacturing plant in Northwest Arkansas outside of the chicken industry, and that was Daisy BB Company. And that was back in the 60s and 70s. That was the big talk of Benton County, was the manufacturing of Daisy BB. And sometimes people forget that too, but that was really the first major manufacturing. And so, but we've come a long ways, and we're very fortunate. if you were during that same time frame from the 60s to today, if you lived in southern Arkansas, you didn't have those same opportunities. And hopefully with the development of some of the lithium and the new EV batteries, looks like South Arkansas is going to have another boom, and that'll be good for our state. Looking forward to that development and for those possibilities for southern Arkansas. But for those of us who stayed in Northwest Arkansas after we graduated high school and after we graduated college, we stayed here. And a lot of our classmates, in the 60s and early 70s left, went to Little Rock, went to Dallas, went to Houston, went to Kansas City, to St. Louis, to Atlanta, to Tulsa, because those were where the jobs and the opportunities were. But for those of us who stayed, and with the development of Walmart and Tyson and J.B. Hunt and the university systems, not only John Brown University, but the University of Arkansas and the community college, it's been a real win for those of us who stayed and worked. And now then, our children and our grandchildren, they don't leave here so much anymore. A few do, but most of them stay. And the people that come from Texas and other states that go to the University of Arkansas and get their education there, a lot of them now don't go back to their home state. They don't go back, they stay in Northwest Arkansas, because the quality of life here is just unparalleled, and the job growth and the opportunity and the quality of life is here. And so we're very fortunate that we live here, and I'm just glad to be a small part of it. Glad to have been raised here, glad to raise my family here, and now I've got 8 grandchildren that are here, and glad to be a part of their lives and see that the opportunity that they have. And so I'm very privileged. I'm very honored to be here. I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of public service in my life, and I wanted to add most of that public service has been volunteerism. It's not been paid. It's been taking care of your constituents and caring about your people and doing it on a volunteer basis, and that's been my life. I've made my livelihood in the private sector. But again, I'm very grateful and very blessed, and I think I speak for a lot of people that live here in Benton County in Northwest Arkansas. We're very blessed.
One last thing, if you had to put it into one sentence, my favorite thing about Benton County is?
I think if you look at our history and where we've come from and how we've grown and how we've gone from agri-based to both agri and business-based, and being able to make a livelihood and support we all have a lot in common. That is that we all trying to make enough money to feed our families and raise good kids and to be sure that they're well educated and have the same opportunities that we had growing up. And so my favorite thing about Benton County is that all of the people that have been a part of this growth and been a part of job creation and economic development, that's my favorite part about Benton County. We've come a long ways, but we've gotten there through hard work and through patience and kindness and respect for others, and lots of good people. So many people, there are way too many, numerous to mention, but again, we've been blessed with being here and having the opportunity that we've had, and I'll be forever grateful.